Many thanks to everybody for joining me this afternoon. I've been working in the sustainability and social value space for many moons now, and I've seen it move through various titles from CSR to ESG over time. And I guess I expected more clarity and ease of reporting to come along with those title changes. But in fact, what I'm seeing every day from my interaction with our clients at SustainIQ is that they're struggling to keep up with the changing pace of what's right or wrong this week in terms of social value calculations, or what is the flavour of the month framework. And when I was thinking about a useful angle for this webinar, I thought about dialing it back to basics. What are the fundamentals of how we prove or showcase social value? And seeing as most companies are led in action by the government's guidance, I believe if we examine what we are being asked to showcase in public contracts, then that will be a better base than any company deciding to throw themselves fully into one specific framework. And that's due in most part to the fact that a lot of our clients are being asked to report on different frameworks for their customers. Before we go too far ahead today, I'd like to kick things off with a quick poll. And so we're going to ask the question, what is your greatest struggle with social value reporting right now? If you want to use your phone camera, you can scan the QR code that's on screen now, or you can click the link that's in the chat, and that will bring you to the poll. We'll come back to the results at the end of the session and have a quick reflection on them. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds there in case anyone's trying to get the QR code, but you can get the link in the chat anyway. So quickly, an introduction into SustainIQ. I'm Maria Diffley, one of two co-founders at SustainIQ, and we are an ESG reporting tool helping companies to measure, monitor and report on their economic, environmental and social impacts. Through our simplified 4-pillar approach to ESG, we aggregate or capture data easily in a number of ways, whether it's manual entries, bulk uploads, QR codes or API integrations to other software systems. We're constantly innovating to try to find easier ways to gather this data for the clients that we work with. The software then calculates the impacts, whether we're looking at socioeconomic, social value proxies or carbon factors. We enter the data in a controlled and assured way, and we provide our clients with easy-to-use dashboards where they can interrogate the data, analyse trends, and model scenarios for change and progress. So, starting from basics, when we speak about social value, what do we mean? Well, traditionally, we based our assessments of success of a programme, a project, or business on financial terms. So was the project value for money for the council or government department, or did we make a decent margin this year? Were we profitable in the business? However, while we were doing that, we were missing out on the holistic picture of the impact that our commercial and operational decisions were having. Social value is about looking at the changes that we make to people's lives in order to create better well-being. It's an account of the changes experienced by people, not simply of the opportunity in the market. It's probably important to recognise why this is even on our agenda today and where this agenda has derived from. In the year 2000, world leaders committed to 8 Millennium Development Goals as a means of attempting to even out the inequality worldwide in basic human rights and the disparity in the spread of wealth and public services worldwide. They then morphed into 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and these were designed to finish the job, to get a statistical zero on hunger, poverty, preventable child deaths and many other targets. They have a wide focus on poverty reduction, but they try to embed environmental, economic and social aspects together. Now, 193 United Nations member states have signed up to playing their part in the Sustainable Development Goals. This then involves filtering down through national government policy. And we've seen a specific emphasis on procurement as a means of influencing the private sector to take environmental and social impacts into consideration. And we're more now frequently seeing ESG and social value as a part of the reporting requirements for private investors and developers alike, largely driven from the need to establish the risk for them with environment and human rights. So without a doubt, the single biggest driver for social value reporting is competitiveness in public tendering and access to the market. Companies can see the benefit now of not only showcasing contract-specific social value impacts, but they want to be able to quantify that and tell the story of the social impacts that they have right across all of their sites and operations and as a company as a whole. In 2013, a landmark bill was introduced in the Social Value Act that now mandates a minimum weighting of 10% is applied to all public contracts across the UK for social value. Public bodies will then use the government's social value model to design PQQs, tenders and contract clauses. And so today what I hope to do is examine this model, and then we'll be able to look practically at the data that we need to gather to be able to report in line with that model, which is then used for all public tendering and contract clauses. Now, I didn't want to get into a debate or further confuse the situation when it comes to standards or frameworks, but just to mention a few of them that are quite widely used. Social return on investment, or SROI, is an outcomes-based methodology or tool which uses a ratio to understand the social value of an investment. It is not an easy tool to use, and it would most likely need you to get training programs in place and specialist consultants to verify proxies specific to your organisation. But it is likely to be the most accurate and more accurate than those broad brushstroke approach of other frameworks. The TOMS framework is very popular. It stands for Themes, Outcomes and Measures. It was developed in conjunction with the National Social Value Task Force. It gives proxies for use, and while it seems to be the framework of a choice for a lot of councils, for instance, it is not specific to areas of deprivation. The IES, or Impact Evaluation Standard, is another framework, but it offers accreditation as well. And the HACT is a framework from the UK Social Value Bank, specifically for the housing sector. And because it's specific to that sector, it then tends to have more robust calculations for that specific sector. There are, of course, heaps of resources out there on different frameworks and advice around creating proxies and using social return on investment. You can access those on the Social Value UK or International's websites. The National Social Value Task Force, or in fact the OECD, have great resources as well. But regardless of the framework that you choose or in fact are required to report on, it's important to say that there is no right or wrong. Social value is not an exact science. It is subjective. All frameworks are grounded largely in solid data sets, and the likes of that in the National Statistics Office. But in reality, what they're actually saying is we have a reason for our methodology, and once we publish that, we can stand over it. It is important to say that trying to put financial proxies to social outcomes is really important, because it helps us to make decisions which then lead to better social value outcomes in the future. All of these standards and frameworks are constantly changing and expanding, but the one constant that you can be sure of is the need to capture the data to plug into them. And that seems to be a bigger struggle for quite a number of the clients that we're dealing with. All social value interventions should have the common thread of these principles that are shown on screen. The first 5 relate to kind of accounting principles, and the last 3 are relating to transparency and the ability to be responsive. By applying these principles in general, you'll improve the value that you're creating for your stakeholders. And if you're accountable to your stakeholders, you will be constantly innovating. Involving stakeholders and giving them a voice is the purpose of social value accounting. When you don't, it can lead to major failures. I worked for many years in international aid development, where very well-meaning charities travelled to the developing world and believed that they knew what was best for the communities there. They started building hospitals and schools. They were never used. They became white elephants over there. And that's largely down to the fact that there were wider issues affecting those communities which they needed to solve before getting access to these facilities. So, talk to your stakeholders, identify the problems, understand what needs to be measured and how it will be measured. And more importantly is the relative importance they place on each problem, because you might have to solve one before you can get to the other. Understand what changes. So understand what change is expected and evaluate this through evidence. Recognize both positive and negative changes that might come from it, as well as those that are intended and unintended. Value the things that matter. This means making decisions about allocating resources between different options, recognizing the values of stakeholders, which will vary depending on their preference and relative importance that they place on it. Only include what's material. So determine what information and evidence must be included in the accounts to give that true and fair picture so that your stakeholders can draw reasonable conclusions about the impact that you're having. Do not overclaim. So only claim the value that your activities are responsible for creating and discount where others have had input. Be transparent. So showcase your methodology openly. Like I said earlier, a lot of this is subjective. So you need to be able to showcase how you came to the results that you came to. Verify the results. So again, you might want to look for appropriate independent assurance. If you are developing group or company-wide targets and proxies, then you can get these verified by the likes of the Social Value UK. Most important, be responsive. So consistent measurement will allow you to respond and change to actions. So once we have those principles in mind, it's important to set an overall group or company-wide strategy, which you will then be able to adapt per project or site. Stage 1 is to look at your operations and map out where you can have the greatest impact. I'll go through the government social value model soon, and that should be used as well as a steer if your company is involved specifically in public tendering. Stage 2 is to engage stakeholders to get their opinion on the changes that can happen, map out the data collection that's needed to showcase the changes, both quantitative and qualitative. Stage 3, analyze, analyze, analyze. So we need to look at the data sets. This is a really important part of proving your social impact, is to have the data to be able to analyze those trends and see what's working and what's not. Stage 4, go back to your stakeholders, inform them of the progress, or in fact, areas where you're failing. Ensure that you're responsive enough to change the activities that you're doing or to change the data collection methods to get you better impact results. I find this list of impact questions incredibly useful as a starting place when helping companies to look holistically at their overall company strategy, and you can see at which stage of the process they relate to. So really what we're looking at is, what problems are we trying to solve? What's the proposed solution? Who experiences the changes in their lives as a result of what we're going to do? What changes are likely to be experienced? How can we measure the changes? How much each change has happened or is likely to happen? How long do we need to measure the changes for? What's the relative importance of each change? And what changes matter and are important for us to manage? So what framework or proxies are right for our organisation? This seems to be a major conundrum for a lot of people because they are mandated to use one framework for one contract and a different framework for a different contract. Most companies that we speak to would like a consistent approach across them all, but they just don't know which one is the right one to go with. And more often than not, 2 years into jumping into a particular framework right across their company, they realise that it's not showcasing them to the best. So my advice, take a step back, and look at the social value model that was created by the UK government. This outlines how each department in the government should score social value. If you use this as a base to determine what data we should be capturing, it becomes much, much easier to plug proxies from any framework into this data set, because they're so closely aligned to this particular social value model created by the government. There's a myriad of reporting requirements, and this is a real problem. It's a disconnect between public bodies in each jurisdiction. It takes massive amounts of resources from our clients to keep up with the changes and requirements in different jurisdictions. And just as one example, we have a customer who operates as a construction company across sites all across the UK. So they have to report on Section 106 planning in London across 4 different councils who have 4 different templated reporting structures. They then have to report to councils and central government using probably the TOMS framework or their own bespoke reporting templates as well. And then in Northern Ireland, they're reporting on the BiSocial portal. So you'll see there's so many different requirements for people. We need to get the basics right. We need to revert back to the model that all of these are actually based on, which is that social value model created by the government. The social value model was released in 2020. It has had several updates, obviously, since then to allow for the pandemic, and it's used as a guidance document for all local and central government agencies to help them to tailor the procurement process with social value at the heart of it. It has 5 key themes, which I'll now run through, but more importantly, I'll also talk through the data that is required from each of these themes for reporting, so that anyone that's listening now can have a think about, are we actually capturing this information currently, and how do we go about doing that? So the first theme is COVID-19 recovery, and the outcome of this was to help local communities to manage and recover from the impact of COVID-19. This is done by providing routes back to work for those left unemployed as a result of COVID. It's looking at new, more innovative ways of working and changes in the working environment to promote healthier workspaces. It's providing support for those worst affected in the community and support for the mental and physical well-being of our staff. But what is the data that we need here? So we need to capture information on new hires who were actually made redundant as a result of COVID, and that is in our main workforce, but also in apprenticeships and placements. We need to monitor and measure the number of people hours that are spent supporting the local community's integration through volunteering and other community-led initiatives that are directly related to COVID-19. We also need to be able to showcase what improvements to the workplace conditions to allow for social distancing, remote working, and sustainable travel solutions. We also need to showcase, during that COVID-19 pandemic and following on from it, what investments have we actually made to the mental and physical well-being of our staff. We need to capture the actions that showcase how we've improved transport links, reduced crime, reduced homelessness, poverty or hunger, reduced loneliness, helped with English language proficiencies. How have we allowed communities to use our facilities, access to community hubs or employee volunteering schemes. And I can guarantee that most companies on this call today have a lot of this, but are you capturing the data that makes it easy for you to report on it? That's the question. The second theme is tackling economic inequality, and there are 2 policy outcomes here. The first being to support the economic opportunities, especially for smaller businesses or those from disadvantaged areas. Help to support the industry to fill skills gaps and encourage more to seek opportunities in whichever sector you're working in. So what data do we need here? We need to be advertising upcoming opportunities in accessible media and actually looking at who are the target audiences from those disadvantaged communities, and how do we showcase the job opportunities we have to those target audiences. We hold Meet the Buyer events, awareness raising by how to actually join our supply chain. How do we make it easy for smaller companies to join our supply chain? Showcase the data which outlines, so when you start a project, are you doing the research into that particular area, the demographics, the skills shortages, groups that are underrepresented in the workforce there, and what are the skills and employment challenges, so that you can tackle those specific challenges to those specific communities. Showcase data to support the contract workforce by providing career advice and opportunities for those staff to progress and to gap those skills shortages. Showcase support for educational attainment, again, and those skills gaps, and offering work experience especially. What are the number of people hours of learning interventions? So are we going out doing careers talks, curriculum support, literacy and safety talks to schools and colleges? The second policy outcome there was really about showcasing innovation and collaboration in the supply chain. Give access to a range of diverse businesses in the supply chain, and also ensure that you have high data and cybersecurity standards in place. So how do we do that? We want to capture how many startups, SMEs and VCSEs are in the supply chain. We want to showcase the percentage spent locally through the workforce and the supply chain, so that we can show socio-economic value in the locality. We need to start capturing in our pre-qual questionnaires how many companies operate to the 10 steps or cybersecurity, or how many have accreditations like Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. The third theme, fighting climate change, that was quite hard for an Irish woman to say all those THs, is to capture and showcase reductions in waste, water, energy, and also show stewardship for biodiversity. So how do we do that? So we need to capture the number of people hours that are spent protecting and improving the environment, the number of green spaces that we create, the reductions in emissions of greenhouse gases that we have put in place, reduction of water use, and the reduction of waste to landfill. The next theme is equal opportunity, and again it has two policy outcomes. The first one is really focused on increasing representation of disabled people in the workforce, but also in offering them opportunities for promotion and upskilling. And the second is how we measure, monitor, report and take action on inequalities in diversity, gender, race, age and pay in the workforce, and how do we manage the risks of modern slavery. So a number of things we can do there in terms of capturing the data for this. We need the number and percentage of disabled people employed as an overall percentage of the workforce, and the number and percentage of disabled people employed as part of apprenticeships or training schemes. We need to have data on inclusive and accessible recruitment practices and what difference that's making to our recruitment and retention. We need to show also how are we including supported businesses in the contract. So if we don't have an opportunity to provide employment for disabled people within our contract, are we actually helping those businesses that employ or have a social purpose to employ disabled people as well, or provide services for them? Kind of an easy win is to sign up to be a disability confident employer, train up and put the policies in place so that you know that you can provide what's needed for a disabled workforce. In terms of the second outcome, we're really looking at trying to capture who is employed that's from an underrepresented area of society, and we do that through our main workforce, our apprenticeships and training schemes. We need to capture in our pre-quals the number of subcontractors and suppliers who are committed to a code of ethics. So that's the fundamental principles of good work. We need to capture data to allow us to tier our supply chain in order of the risk of modern slavery. And a really good resource for this is the ETI base code, the Ethical Trade Initiative base code. That'll be included in your packs after this in terms of resources. We need to capture information on the number of hours that are dedicated to fighting modern slavery. And while we might not be out in the streets, we do it through the likes of employment checks or training. Theme 5 is all about well-being. We want to create peaceful, healthy communities in the workforce and beyond. And the data we need for this is making mental health at work a commitment, capturing how many of your subcontractors are also making that a commitment, capturing the data that that happens in terms of training or information sessions or activities on site that promote better health and well-being through you and your subcontractors? How can you co-create or design programs, training initiatives, partner with educational institutions, or volunteer that will also showcase how you're promoting well-being in the workplace? And then look at the number of people hours that are spent supporting local community integration, such as volunteering and other community-led initiatives. So data mapping and data capture. Now that we've examined some of the information that you will need, you now need to map where is that data sitting in your organization. It may very well sit on various systems. Frighteningly enough, most will sit on spreadsheets in somebody's desktops that the rest of the business has no access to. It will invariably belong to different departments. And this is where I can recommend having a system like SustainIQ in place that will help aggregate all of that data easily. When you look at the report, the role and the department, it's really useful to map out who actually enters the data versus who needs it for their day-to-day role. And you will quickly realize that a large portion of your staff are engaged in these activities or will need this data far more than you have actually expected. So SustainIQ provides a solution to help with that data gathering element and making your life easier for reporting. We make the data mapping and data capture easy for companies who need to report on their environmental, social and governance commitments. Our 4 pillars cover all of the requirements for reporting on the social value model. It provides our customers with an easy to understand process for reporting. You'll see our 4 pillars on screen now. So responsible procurement is where we really capture socioeconomic impacts in the supply chain. Our environmental management pillar, we capture waste, water, energy, biodiversity, all your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. The final 2 pillars are focused on your traditional social value piece. Pillar 3, people, health and diversity, is really looking internally at how do we impact our own employees by looking at the training and health and well-being, diversity and inclusion initiatives. And pillar 4 is really looking outwardly at beyond our organisations, how do we impact local communities? We don't reinvent the wheel. There's enough social value frameworks and proxies out there to confuse the nation. We collect the data to allow companies to report in line with the government social value model, and they can then plug proxies into the system based on the contract requirements or the agreed frameworks they're working with. We try in as much as possible to take the complication out of the process. Social value is all about giving a voice to those who are underrepresented. And at SustainIQ, we really do believe in capturing this in the stakeholders' own words. That's why we capture qualitative data as well as quantitative, to allow companies to make this story human again and not just about the money it has saved the exchequer. We don't want to forget that it's actually lives that we're changing. Saving the public purse is an added benefit. So in summary, don't get too bogged down on the types of frameworks to use, as you may be asked to report on many different frameworks by different clients. Set a strategy for the company as a whole by answering the 10 impact questions. Use the government's social value model as a basic guide, because all of these standards and frameworks are really closely aligned to it. You, of course, cannot make any informed decisions or on progress or report without the actual data. So hopefully today it's given you a snapshot to go back and look at what do we actually currently have in place and what do we need to put in place. Then and only then should you be worried about the choice of proxy that's right for you. And the team here at SustainIQ are more than happy to debate it out with anyone from your team. Before we get into questions, if you want to see the results of the poll, you can scan there, and I have the results here in front of me. So 19% of you said that managing reporting requirements of different clients is your greatest struggle. 23% are still in that conundrum of understanding the methodologies behind various different frameworks and their social value calculations. There's 27% of you who are struggling with where to know where to start, and hopefully today I've answered some of that. Start at where all of this is based on. So that government social value model, really delve into that and try to create your strategies with that as a baseline. Capturing data in a consistent way across the sites, there's 8% of you have said that that's an issue. And showcasing the value of social value to the business. This again comes back to showcasing to your company or your business how closely linked it is to your competitive advantage within the tendering process. It's also looking at building trust with your stakeholders and showcasing how important that is for your license to operate. And luckily enough, nobody said they have no struggles with it. So we know we have quite a way to go in terms of trying to answer those questions. And what we'd like to do as a follow-up from that is maybe have separate spin-off sessions to answer those specifically and bring some experts from those various different frameworks on board to discuss it in the future. So what I'd like to do now is if there's any questions, you can pop them into the chat. If anybody would like to learn more about SustainIQ, if you have some challenges with ESG reporting or want a quick chat, please feel free to reach out to us. Anyone in the team would be happy to talk to you. So I just have a question in here. Is emissions data environmental based on the GHG protocol or some other methodology? So again, because every company is different and their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions might be different depending on, for instance, is it company owned vehicles or private? We work with each individual company to ensure the methodology is correct for them. We do break it down into scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. That's the way a lot of people are reporting on it now and prefer reporting on it. We also break it down more granular than that. So if you want to only report on waste, water, energy, we can do that as well through the system. Hopefully that will have, we do use, based on each jurisdiction, we have all the carbon factors for each jurisdiction in the back end of the system. So UK carbon factors, Irish carbon factors, Spanish. So it just depends on the jurisdiction you're running in. So I have another question in from Willie Maltman. The framework looks good and it is soundly based as well as flexible. That said, how do we get procurement bodies to accept this without us being declared non-compliant? I think the answer to that question is, for a lot of local authorities and central government, this is new. Look, it's literally in the last year that they've been trying to implement this into their procurement processes. And as much and all as it is learning for us, it's also a learning for them to be able to allow enough flexibility in this. I think a lot of local authorities have jumped on one particular framework because it's easier for them to, I guess, stand over and capture the data that they need. But what I would be saying to a lot of local authorities, if they're listening, is really look back towards that model and see, do companies really need to use one specific framework? Is there a flexibility around that? What's the core of what we're trying to capture here? And again, I think it's about being able to, if there's an agreed framework in place for a specific local authority, for instance, then it's about plugging those proxies into your overall data. Because the thing is here, we should be trying to capture what social value what our social value impacts are as an entire organization, not just on one particular project. So it's kind of for us to go back to that as companies. How do we capture this as a company as a whole, and then be able to feed that into individual projects? I've got another question in here. In Scotland, there have been some special onerous requirements for city regional deals and carbon. Could SustainIQ adapt to those definite standards as opposed to what might be suitable or preferable for the company partner involved? Do such requirements exist in Belfast? Yes. So We've been talking to a lot of local authorities around this specifically. So there's quite a lot of local authorities that would like to use a system like SustainIQ, and what we would be able to do then is specify within those contracts that are being used under those local authorities. Once we have the data, we can then add in those specific proxies and standards that are specific to those regional deals. There's definitely specific requirements within the Belfast City regional deal as well. And I think for councils, there seems to be kind of a three-pronged approach here. It's, you know, how do we capture what's going on across our own estates? So you need to do it yourselves. The second one is, how do we capture what's happening across our capital spends in any of the bills that we have? And thirdly is, how do we impact or how do we influence other businesses? And we're working with councils right across the UK and Ireland right now today to implement those kind of solutions for them through SustainIQ. So SustainIQ is not rigid. We're very flexible and we work with each individual customer. We've got another one in here. I work for a social housing procurement consortium, and I think the issue has always been a narrow view of only using HACT, despite knowing it didn't have all the proxies required. I think there needs to be more flexibility in general to understand social value proxies as a whole rather than a narrow view. I can 100% agree with that observation. I think that's the reality is, I think if we're able to send over the methodologies that we use, there should be flexibility around them. Of course, the problem with that is if housing association or if the council don't actually lock those in there, you run the risk of people you know, being untruthful about these kind of things as well. Is there any other questions? Folks, I hope you've gained something from that today. I think you know, it's interesting looking at the polled results from earlier. So our team will follow up after this with resources. We have a little resource pack for anyone who's looking for information from the slides. We're also going to follow up with the recording from this session, and 100% please, if you're from a local council and you'd like to discuss how we could help you to capture this in a more flexible way, or from the housing consortium, please do reach out to us. We'd be absolutely delighted to speak with you. And of course, any private companies out there that are looking for how do you start? How do we make a start? We have a process in place that will make it very easy for you. So thank you very much. I would love to see you all again on our next social value session, and we'll keep you updated on that. Take care.
Thank you.